First parasha in this new cycle. It's from Genesis 1:1 to Genesis 6:8. I'm just going to start with a blessing. Baruch et Adonai hamvorach. Baruch Adonai hamvorach leolam va'ed. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachavanu mikol ha'amim ונתן לנו את תורתו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה. Alright, so these are resources that I use for the study. None of this is mine. This is all from people that know way more than me and that have taken the time to study and look at all this information. So theirs is the credit. Alright, so today we're going to be covering a few topics. So we're going to cover what create and exist meant in the ancient Near East. It didn't mean the same thing that it means for us today. We're going to talk about Genesis as the world's functional origins, not as the world's material origins. We're going to be covering the theme of chaos and order. In Genesis 1 specifically, we're going to be focusing on Genesis chapter 1, not the other chapters. There's a lot of information, and we're going to cover the concept of divine rest, how God ordered the cosmos, what it means to be made in the image of God, and what the phrase, "and it was good," meant. Alright, so we're going to get started with the quote that we usually cite by John Walton. The Bible was written for us, not to us. So I want to get started with this because I'm going to be talking about Hebrew. I'm going to be using some Hebrew words, but I don't want you guys to get the impression that I think I'm like a Bible Jesus because I know Hebrew, because it's not true. So I love this quote from John Walton where he says that language assumes a culture. It operates in a culture, serves a culture, and is designed to communicate into the framework of a culture. So when we read a text written in another language addressed to another culture, we must also translate the culture as well as the language if we wish to understand the text fully. So knowing Hebrew doesn't automatically make you a Bible genius. That's not true. So for example, when the Bible says Sarah was beautiful, Sarah yafa. You can understand the Hebrew, but if you don't understand what it meant to be beautiful in that time, you're not going to understand what it meant, even if you know the Hebrew. So I'm not saying that Hebrew is useless. It helps, and it's really good, but it's not the end-all, be-all. It's not the only thing that you need to understand the Bible. All right, so we're going to be focusing on the sphere of chaos and order. You can look at this parasha, Rico said, through all of these, but we're going to be focusing today specifically on chaos and order. All right, so in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Genesis 1:1. And this is a very interesting rhetorical device. So when it says that God created the heavens and the earth, it's a rhetorical device to kind of mean like a parenthesis. So like anything in between that, it's like basically everything in between. All right, so God created the heavens, so up above, and the earth, and everything in between. Basically, that's what it means. You can see that a lot in the Bible. If you Google like merism, that word specifically, you'll find a bunch of other examples. It's really, really interesting how they use it. So basically, it's like a parenthesis. You're going to see that a lot. And then, so then we're going to look at the word create. So when we hear create in our head, it's like, okay, the materials came to life. The atoms, the electrons, and all those things. I'm not a science person, so don't quote me on that. But, so create means to bring something into existence. But if we want to understand what create meant in the ancient Near East, then we have to understand what it meant to exist. So if creation meant to bring something into existence, what does existence mean? And it's not the same than it is for us today. So in our culture, we believe that existence is material. So if something takes up space, it exists, right? So if this computer is just here, it takes up a certain amount of space, it exists. But in the ancient Near East, they had a different mindset. So in the ancient Near East, they thought of existence as more like a functional-oriented thing than a physical thing. So for them, if this computer doesn't work, it doesn't exist. But like a computer doesn't exist because it doesn't function. All right? So to us, a computer exists because it's just there. It's physically there. But in the ancient Near Eastern mindset, it probably didn't really exist because it didn't have a function. All right? So since in our culture we believe that existence is material, then we consequently believe that to create something means to bring its material properties into existence. Thus, our discussions on origins tend to focus on material origins. So when we read Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. We think created as in like the world just came into being, like the physical world specifically. So since we see its existence as material, we view Genesis 1 as a creation of the material world. That's not how they viewed it in the ancient Near East. This is not to say that God didn't create the physical world, obviously. But Genesis 1 is more going to be focused on the actual bringing order to the world and giving it a function than the physical creation. That's how John Walton talks about it in his books, which I suggest you guys read them. It's really, really, really good. So to exist means to have a function. So to create in the ancient Near Eastern mindset means to give a function. It's not saying that they like their mindset is better than ours or ours is better. It's just an observation of the differences. So existence, have a function. So to create, basically to bring something to existence, is to give it a function. So the Hebrew word bara, that's what we use to say create. So the word bara, it appears about 50 times in the Old Testament. Deity is always either the subject or the implied subject. So this means that it's a divine activity and humans can't perform or participate in it. So you're not going to see humans doing bara, that type of creation. So humans can make things, but they're not going to do it with this word. And this is the word that it uses in Genesis. So the context of bara, no materials for the creative act are ever mentioned. And in the ancient Near East, they would have understood Genesis 1:1 as, in the initial period, God created by assigning functions throughout the heavens and the earth. And this is how he did it. All right? So this doesn't mean, again, that God didn't create the world materially. Obviously he did. But that's not what the account of Genesis is about, because to the ancient Near East, they didn't really care, because to them it was obvious that a deity created the physical world. But to them, it was who orders chaos, who is above chaos, who beat chaos, who brought order to the world. That's what they want to know. And they want to know who was the best God to serve. So that's why you see Marduk, he has a fight with the sea monster and like the chaos monster. When he wins, he's enthroned and he becomes king. So that's what they cared about. They didn't care about who made the physical stuff, because obviously a God did it. But they want to know who brought order to it so that we can serve that God. So Genesis is a home story, not a house story. It's like an example, because I had a hard time in the beginning understanding like physical material. Like what do you mean? So if you look at it with this example, it's a great example. So to build a house, according to Google, you have to set the preparation for the foundation. Don't quote me on this. Construct the framing, rough-ins, plumbing, electrical installed. You have to install insulation, complete the drywall, interior finishes, install the final interior fixtures, etc., etc. This is how we build the physical house. So all the physical properties of building a house, this is how we do it. But if we were to build a home, so if we can have the physical house, so the structure exists, but it has no functions. The bedrooms haven't been assigned, so you don't know where's the office, where's the bedroom, etc. How are you going to use the rooms? What's the living room? What's the dining room? You don't know any of that. There's no furniture arranged, and nobody's living in it. In other words, it has no functions. It's just the house, but it doesn't have any function. So does a home exist? Exactly. So this is kind of an example to give you guys an example of how the mindset in the ancient Near East was. So to them, if it's just a house, it's functionless, it's worthless. What's the point? But if it's a home, it has order, it has, the bedrooms have been assigned, everything's been assigned, everything is in order, everything's functioning, then it exists, basically. So Genesis is a home story, not a house story. Again, it doesn't mean that God didn't create the world. Obviously he did, but to the ancient Near East, they didn't really care about that. That was obvious. In the ancient Near East also, they didn't believe in what we would call, John Walton says that, they didn't believe in what we call miracles, because everything was, to them, everything was deity based. So to us, we see the natural world and we see the spiritual world. But to them, everything was controlled by a God, basically. So the wind, it was God. To us, okay, the wind, we understand that like how it physically works. We understand the science. To them, they didn't really care about science in that perspective. All right, so it all has to do with the perspective. And God is conveying the story according to what the people in that time understood. He's trying to convey that he's the master of the universe and he's the one that brings order. All right, so the building of the house, that would be the material origins. The family moving in, establishing functions and functionaries. That would be the functional origins of the house. So Genesis is about the world's functional origins, not its material origins. So for example, we have a guitar with no strings. It's just because it's materially there doesn't mean it really, doesn't mean that it matters. It has to sort of function. So to them, again, in the ancient Near East, this is what they would see. So that's not a guitar. It doesn't have strings. It doesn't function. What's the point? Or a violin that looks like that. You can't play it. So what's the point of having the wood there if you can't really do anything with it? So in the ancient Near East also, you're going to see this a lot in Genesis 1. Certain acts of creation. So the first one would be separation. So here we see where God separates day and night. He separates the sea and the dry land. So to distinguish something means from other things is to create it. And I was talking about this last night, and I think maybe I don't know what you guys would think about this analogy, I guess, but when God separates us from the other nations, he creates us into a nation. We wouldn't be a nation if we weren't separated from other nations. So the same way that God separates day and night, sea and dry land, he creates them by separating them, because otherwise it doesn't have any identity if it's all just mixed up. And then the second one has to do with role. So creation often involves the assigning of roles, and a lot of times this happens through the giving of a name. So we see Adam, when he names the animals, God also finalizes the creative acts with the giving of a name. So a lot of times naming is going to be like assigning a role. So that's why you see a lot of times in the Torah where people are giving names once their mission has been given, or Abraham has his name changed, Joseph has his name changed, or changed or given a new name. By Pharaoh, there's a lot of people there's a lot of name changing. It has to do with role, what role they're going to play in the future. So this is from the Enuma Elish. When on high, no name was given to heaven, nor below was the netherworld called by name. So it wasn't given a role. It wasn't functioning because it didn't have a name. So the names are very, very important in the ancient Near East. All right, so as a review, what did it mean for something to exist in the ancient Near East?
As have a function.
Mm-hmm. And in our culture, we see existence as blank.
Space.
Yeah, material. Yeah, taking up space. Yeah. And in the ancient Near East, they saw existence as. Yeah. And what did it mean to create something in the ancient Near East? Mm-hmm. And then Genesis is about the world's functional origins, not its blank origins. Mm-hmm. Then naming was an act of blank in the ancient Near East. Yep. Or an act of creation, or how we establish a role. And an overarching theme in Genesis and in the Bible is blank and order.
Chaos and order.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Oh,
Yeah, so here are all the answers if you guys need them. So again, with the methodology, we're going to be focusing on chaos and order specifically. Rico said that you can look at this parasha through all different angles. All of these are in it, but we're going to be focusing today on chaos and order specifically. So in Genesis 1:2, now the earth was formless and empty, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. So in John Walton's book, he says that if Genesis is talking about material origins, we would expect it to begin without material. If it was talking about functions, it would begin describing a functionless state. So water is functionless. You can't plant anything in water. You can't cultivate in water. You can't live in water. So water is considered functionless, or is chaos. So the words here used to describe the world state are tohu vavohu in the Hebrew. So everybody say tohu vavohu.
Tohu vavohu.
All right, so then David Sumura, an Old Testament scholar and linguist, he translates tohu as unproductive rather than describing something without physical form. A lot of times they translate it as formless, but this linguist, he was quoted by John Walton in his book, and he says that he just describes it as unproductive rather than not having a physical form. So the word tohu occurs 29 times in the Old Testament. Some examples would be parallel to the wilderness in Deuteronomy 32:10, descriptive of idols that can accomplish nothing, wandering in a trackless waste. A tohu settlement is described as desolate, so basically describing desolation. Again, not productive, chaos. And then rulers of the world are made as tohu, parallel to without profit. That would be in Isaiah 44:9. So here we see all these different examples, and it's not saying that they don't have any form, it's just saying that they're unproductive. It's worthless. And I like the example of the idols specifically. That's a great example of idols are worthless. They can't accomplish anything, so they are tohu. And the word vavohu, it only appears like 4 times. John Walton said that it only appears together with tohu. So that's why we didn't really talk about it. Tohu is the one that appears on its own. And vavohu only appears together with tohu. So that's why we focus on specifically the word tohu. And so in John Walton's book, he says that it's tohu vavohu is non-functional or having no purpose and generally unproductive in human terms. All right, so then this describes the beginning state in Genesis, the functionless cosmic waters, or places in the ordered creation in which order had not been imposed, like the desert. So the desert is also considered a place that is tohu because, again, you can't cultivate in the desert. It's hard to survive in the desert. It's harsh. It's chaos, just like the water. It's the same thing. So they're considered like chaotic places. And again, everything that we learn in this parasha, you guys can see it in the rest of the Torah. Like it's just a theme, the key theme of chaos and order, just like with the other in the methodology you see everywhere in the Torah. So think of a room that looks like this. That would be described as tohu. So it's a house with no order. So the material is there, but it has no function. It's unproductive. It's tohu. So it's worthless, even though you have a bunch of books on the floor, even though you have all those things there. But if everything is a mess, then what are you going to do with it? It's unproductive. So same thing with this one. So it's just an example to get you guys visualize, I guess, what tohu looks like. So in Genesis 1, there's a few words describing chaos, and these words are going to appear again in the Bible a lot. So the first one would be tohu vabohu. Just describe that one. Unproductive and darkness. It will be choshech. And then tehom, which would be the deep, normally like the waters of the deep, like the deep waters. And just plain the waters too, ma'im. And the seas, the yamim. And the taninim, the sea creatures or sea monsters. Some people say sea monsters. So these words are going to be used to describe chaos. Also in the ancient Near East, they thought of these words as like parallel to chaos. And we're going to see an example here from a Sumerian text. So the earth was in darkness, the lower world was invisible, and the water did not flow through the opening in the earth. Nothing was produced in the vast earth, and the furrow had not been made. And then it continues on, but I want to focus on those first 3 that appear there, the ones that are highlighted. So here we see the word darkness, choshech. Here we see waters. So the same thing we saw in Genesis, the waters. And we see unproductive, tohu vabohu, nothing was produced. So this is a great example, again, of the ancient Near East parallels. And just because something is a parallel in the ancient Near East doesn't mean the Bible copied the ancient Near East. It just means that it's communicating in a language that the people from that time can understand. In this case, the Israelites. So Genesis 1 begins with no functions rather than no material. It starts with functionless waters. So at the beginning of the creation process, there's already material in existence, the waters of the deep. And these primeval cosmic waters are the classic form of non-existence takes in the functionally oriented ancient world. So this is very important, the functionally oriented ancient world. Function was very important to them. And then God's created work has established order in the cosmos, just as he has established order in society and all other areas. Science has observed that order and given us an appreciation of how deeply that penetrates. So in modern materialism, people are nothing but physical forms having no functions. other than to survive. The theology of Genesis 1 is crucial to a right understanding of our identity and our place in the world. So quotes from John Walton's book, which I highly recommend it. And Genesis 1 gives little attention to material origins, though of course God did that too. So name some words used to denote chaos. So one of the synonyms.
Tohu. Yes. Tohu vavohu.
That was good. Good. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. All right. So again, focusing on chaos and order. We can look at it from all different angles, but specifically chaos and order. So just think in the mindset again of how God is bringing order to the world. So days 1 and 3 will be focused on establishing functions. So can somebody read this part?
And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, and that it was good. And God caused there to be a separation between the light and between the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. And there was evening, and there was morning the first day.
Mm-hmm. And there we see also, remember in the beginning I told you guys about the merism, so like the parentheses. So there was evening and there was morning. That includes dawn, that includes dusk, that includes the afternoon. So instead of saying it was evening, morning, afternoon, night, like naming all of them, it just says evening and morning. It includes everything in between. So darkness is a lack of order or function. Again, as we saw, so it was like an example of chaos. Because what can you do in the darkness? You can't do anything in the darkness. You can't see. So you can't do anything. So again, looking at Genesis through the lens of bringing order from chaos. So this is some examples from the Zondervan Illustrated Bible Backgrounds Commentary. So the first one would be, as God calls the cosmos into existence, it is important to remember that it is a functional existence, not necessarily a physical existence. In this case, though, we would think as light as having physical properties, the ancients didn't think in those terms. So we view light as like through the lens of science, how it works, all the rays, how they interact with your eyes, all of those things. In the ancient Near East, they saw it as, they didn't think about it in physical terms. So just as noted, the light was not considered something physical in the ancient world. Rather, it was a phenomenon. So here in Genesis, light is identified with alternating day and night periods. Since light is called day and darkness is called night, the text indicates that the functional focus is time. In Egypt, the sun god Re is considered the creator of time, as he rises every morning, again relating the day and night cycle and light to time. In a broken section broken section of the Babylonian creation epic, Marduk is apparently creating time, as the text references to the day and the year are followed by the references to the watches of the night. So a lot of people, they're like, how did God create light, but he didn't create the sun yet? Or like, it doesn't talk about the sun. The sun comes like 3 days later. So there's also like a lot of different interpretations to that, and like they're all valid. But specifically with the lens of the ancient Near East, they saw light as not a physical thing, it's a functional thing. So the first thing that God ordered was time. So when God says, let there be light, we must understand it as let there be a period of light. So day one does not concern itself with the creation of the physical light, the physicist light, as we think of it today. So day one concerns something much more significant, much more elemental to the functioning of the cosmos and to the experience of the cosmos. So on day one, God created time. So imagine if we didn't have time, like how would that work? It would be a mess. Like it would be chaos, because if we can't tell time, if time doesn't go on, we're just like speeding up and going like slower, whatever. Like if we didn't have time functioning as it is, or we had like random periods of day, random periods of night, and it wasn't daytime and nighttime, specifically how God ordered it, then what's the point? So it would be chaos. So it's like one of the most important elements to existence. So can somebody read this part?
And God said, let there be a vault dome in the midst of the waters, and let it cause a separation between the waters. Verse 7. So God made the vaulted dome and he caused a separation between the waters which were under the vaulted dome, and between the waters which were over the vaulted dome. And it was so, verse 8. And God called the vaulted dome heaven. There was evening and there was morning, a second. Genesis 1:6 to 8.
Exactly. So then we see in the ending, again, the parentheses. It was evening, it was morning. It includes everything in between. All right. So this is what the ancient Near Eastern people, they thought the world was. This was in their mind how it was. They didn't think the earth was round. They didn't think of any of the things that we have like studied nowadays. They thought of it like this. So they thought about the world, the waters above and the waters below. There was like a hard firmament that kept the waters above from coming down.
When was this? Before the earth was separated? Or
this is how the people in the ancient world, they thought the world was, because
they just thought.
Exactly. It was like a visual thing. So they saw the world and they kind of described it in how they physically saw it. All right. So there's an example from the IBP on Bible Backgrounds Commentary. So in a similar way, the expanse, sometimes called the firmament, set up in day 2 is a regulator of the climate. The ancient Near Eastern culture, they viewed the cosmos as featuring a 3-tiered structure consisting of the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. So climate originated from the heavens, and the expanse was seen as the mechanism that regulated moisture and light. So this was basically what in their minds regulated moisture, light, and the weather, basically. So it is not the physical composition that is important, but the function. So in the Babylonian creation epic Enuma Elish, the goddess representing this cosmic ocean Tiamat is divided in half by Marduk to make the waters above and the waters below. Really creepy, but that's an example of people in the ancient Near East believed, specifically in Babylon. So day 2 is about establishing the function of the weather and the climate. So in the ancient Near Eastern mindset, the firmament, like that's what controlled the weather. So again, it's establishing functions and bringing order from chaos. So the important thing was not the physical structure, but its function, and specifically who gave it that function. So again, who brings order to the chaos?
God.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. All right, so anybody can read this one?
And God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered to one place. And then the dry ground appeared, and it was so. And God called the dry ground earth, and he called the collection of the waters seas. And God saw that it was good, and God said, let the earth produce green plants that will bear seed, fruit, trees bearing fruit in which there is seed, according to its kind on the earth. And it was so. And the earth brought forth green plants bearing seed according to its kind, and trees bearing fruit in which there was seed according to its kind. And God saw that it was good, and it was evening, and there was morning, a third day. Genesis 1:9.
Mm-hmm. So here we see, again, bringing order to chaos. There was chaotic waters. You can't really produce anything there. You can't live there. You can't exist there. So once God, he separates the water from the dry lands, that's, again, it's a beginning of creating order in the cosmos. So this is all from the last word of Genesis 1. So some people have trouble interpreting day 3 since nothing is created. So right, day 3, we just read it, nothing was created per se. There was a separation between the waters and the dry lands. But it didn't say the dry land just appeared out of nowhere. It was separated from the waters. So if we look,
it was already there.
So that's what, yeah. So this problem only exists if Genesis 1 is a material origins account. If we look at Genesis 1 as a functional origins account, in day 3 it makes total sense because it's bringing function, it's bringing order. We can't function if everything is just water. So on day 3, we see the function of vegetation set up by the separation of the water and land, because we can't have food, we can't cultivate without dry land. So this is the function of vegetation. So from a functional perspective, the soil and the water are the principle of seed bearing, all essential to the production of food. So in day 3, again, continuing talking about day 3, non-existence for the Egyptians was not wiped out in the acts of creation, but it would have pushed to the outer limits of the cosmos. This is how the Egyptians saw this. So existence and non-existence are balanced in the cosmos, much like an equilibrium exists between matter and antimatter. Consequently, their literature speaks of the primeval hillock that emerged from the primeval waters. The temples were sometimes understood as containing the original primeval hillock in the center of their sacred space. This was pretty interesting. The Mesopotamian literature does not speak much about the emergence of the land, but there is a discussion in the collection of the waters to their appropriate places. And in this feature, then Genesis show more similarity to Egypt. It was common in the ancient world to think of the earth as a single continent with the shape of a flat disk. Likewise, in Genesis, the waters are all gathered into one place and the land appears, presumably in one place. So the recaps of days 1 and 3. So day 1, the basis for time is established. On day 2, the basis for weather is established. And on day 3, the basis for food is established, so the dry land and seed bearing. So these three, the time, weather, and food, are the foundation of life. If we have food and we have weather, but we don't have time, so like time isn't ordered, then when are the seed going to sprout? How long is it going to take them? Makes no sense. If we would remove any of these, it would be total chaos. So it's just foundational for life. So if we desire to see the greatest work of the Creator, it is not to be found in the materials He brought together. It is that He brought them together in such a way that they work. So I can try to build a house, but if I don't build the foundation right, I don't make everything come together in the right way, then what's the point? So it's not only that God brought the material world together, but it's how He brought it together that it works so perfectly. So you can see this also when you look at science. It just works so perfectly. Everything works perfectly, and it's incredible. And we still don't even understand half of it. So imagine if God would have only created 2 of these. So just time and weather, but it was just all water. What can you do with that? We can't do anything with that. We can't cultivate and we can't eat. What if weather and food is established and then there's no time? Again, there's no time. How are the seeds going to sprout? If there's no specific time for day and night and all the biology of seeds and how that works. Or if there was just time and weather, but then there's no food. Again, you just remove one of these and it's total chaos. So God's creative work has established order in the cosmos, just as He has established order in society and in other areas through the Torah. Science has observed that order and given us an appreciation about how that order deeply penetrates. So bringing order from chaos by establishing functions. So days 1 and 3 are about establishing functions. So name some of the words to denote chaos. Then an overarching theme in Genesis 1 and the Bible is
darkness.
Chaos. Yeah. Chaos and order. So on day 1, God established the function of. Then on day 2, God established the function of
Light.
weather. Then on day 3, God established the function of
Land.
Vegetation. But yeah. All right, and here are the answers. If you guys want to look them during the week. All right, and God said, "Let there be lights in the vaulted dome of heaven to separate day from night, and let them be as signs for appointed times and for days and years. And they shall be as lights in the vaulted dome of heaven to give light to the earth." And it was so. And God made 2 lights, the greater one to rule the day, and the smaller light to rule the night and the stars. And God placed them in the vaulted dome of heaven to give light on earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, a 4th day. We're going to focus on that specifically in the highlighted, so to separate day from night, and signs for appointed times, days and years. So the usually detailed, the usually detailed description has the purpose of emphasizing that sun, moon, and stars are not divinities, as they were usually thought to be in the ancient Near East. So the person from the ancient Near East would have read this, it would have made no sense to them, or it would have been a challenge to them. because to them it would have been okay. Well, these are gods, so like, why aren't you talking about like their godly powers and stuff like that? So in the ancient Near East, the sun, the moon, and the stars were gods. So the function of the luminaries is very interesting. How it's all very functionally oriented because it separates day from night, separates light from darkness. They will be as signs for appointed times, the telling days and years of the calendars. They give light to the earth. The greater one rules the day, and the smaller one rules the night. So here we see all the functions of the sun and the moon. It didn't just say, made the sun and moon, that's it. Like this are what they're gonna do. This is their functions. So day 5, installing functionaries. So we saw in days 1 through 3 that it's about installing the functions, and then days 4 through 5 or 4 through 6 are going to be installing the functionaries that are going to help in those functions.
Very interesting.
Thank you. Okay. So can anybody read this one?
Me. And God said, "Let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly over the earth across the face of the molten dome of heaven." So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moved with which the waters swarm, according to their kind, and every bird with wings according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and the birds multiply on the earth." There was evening and there was morning, a fifth day.
All right. So here we see God creating the sea creatures, every living creature that moves in the water, and with which the waters swarm. So their function is to be fruitful, to multiply, to fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds multiply in the earth. So this is their function. So on day 5,
and God said that the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kind, cattle and moving things and wild animals according to their kind. And it was so. So God made wild animals according to their kind, and the cattle according to their kind, and every creeping thing of the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good.
Mm-hmm. All right. So on day 5, on day 6, there's a continuation of day 6.
Okay.
So,
and God said,
maybe Crystal, can you read?
I can read. And God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, and according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the heaven, and over cattle, and over all the earth, and over every moving thing that moves upon the earth." So God created humankind in the likeness of God. He created him, male and female. He created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and the birds of the heaven, and over every animal that moves upon the earth." And God said, "Look, I am giving to you every plant that bears seed, which is on the face of the whole earth, and every kind of tree that bears fruit. They shall be yours as food. And every kind of animal of the earth, and to every bird of the heaven, everything that moves upon the earth, in which there is life, I am giving every green plant." And it was so. And God saw everything that he made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, a sixth day.
Where did you read that at?
Yeah, I covered a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kind of lost track.
All right. So made in the image of God. So here we see God giving humans the function of subduing and ruling creation. So the characterization of humans being in the image of God and the functions listed reflect a royal role for people, since these descriptions would most frequently be applied to kings. So normally in ancient Near East, if somebody would subdue and rule over creation, this would be normally the language that I would use for kings. So they are giving the responsibility of bringing order to their world. So kings used to be the ones that brought order to the world.
That is God.
But then in the ancient Near East, they thought, well, as like because they thought of kings as, I think you guys, I don't know if you guys can add something to this. They thought of the king as the image of the God on the earth.
Right. So like you could look at. So you could look at Pharaoh. And you can look at Pharaoh and how Pharaoh was looked at as being the representative of the deity on earth, being in the image of the deity. It's not just like how you look, but also your function, and sharing the responsibility of bringing order to the nation, Egypt, in the case of Pharaoh.
Mm-hmm. All right. So then, and this would be in stark contrast to the role of humanity in the ancient Near East, where they were created to serve. Here we see the attribution to all people. That was the role prerogative of the king in the rest of the ancient Near East. So in the ancient Near East, the gods created the humans to serve them, to feed them. Doesn't mean that we don't serve God, obviously, but it was like a really physical thing. So like the gods needed to eat, they needed to be clothed, and all those different kinds of things. So so this is another contrast with the ancient Near East. So being made in the image of God, according to the lost world of Genesis 1, it concerns function. So being God's vice-regent stewards who are charged with subduing and ruling over the other species and creatures. It also concerns identity. So assigned to us by God, it's not something that we can take on our own or that can develop in us. Naming and giving an identity are acts of creation.
3.
And number 3 is substitution, for the word representative. So when the king in the ancient Near East had an image of himself placed by the gate in a city he had conquered, or at the border of a land where he claimed, the image proclaimed the king's presence there. So we're supposed to bring God's presence into the world. We're supposed to be God's representatives and act like God would want us to act. And we learn this through the Torah.
It's hard to do though.
I mean,
there's like a lot of corrections that you learn in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
The Bible always has something new to teach you.
Mm-hmm.
I always have something new to teach.
Mm-hmm. And then this also concerns divine-human relationship. This can be seen easily observed when Adam begets Seth in his own likeness and in his own image. So Adam, when Seth is born, uses the same phrase there. And then made in the image of God. The difference when we get to the creation of people is that even as they have the function to populate, just like the fish and the birds and the animals, they also have a function relative to the rest of God's creation. So to subdue and rule them. Not only that, they also have the function relative to God, that they're his image. And they also have the function relative to each other, that they're designed male and female. And all these show how it was a functional orientation and not that much material. So they were concerned with functions. What is the functions of human beings? What functions did God create me to complete? And then this was very, very interesting, I thought. So contrary to concerns about overpopulation that are evident in early Mesopotamian literature, in Genesis, God desires people to multiply without restriction. They all fill the earth. In the Atrahasis epic, the gods are distressed because with the multiplication of people, problems and noise also increase. So the gods therefore send plagues, famine, and drought to counteract the population explosion. It's kind of depressing when like the gods that you believe in think you're so noisy and so annoying that they have to wipe you out because you're so annoying. So it's pretty depressing. So again, it's looking at the contrast that the Bible has. Not only does it have things parallel in the ancient Near East because God couldn't speak to them in a way that they wouldn't understand, but it also makes huge contrasts to where the gods in the ancient Near East were caprichosos, capricious. Capricious? Yeah, that was in Spanish. So yeah. Yeah, so they were like, they would get annoyed easily, basically. So they were annoyed at the humans making too much noise, so they would wipe them out. So it sounds kind of messed up to us now, but yeah, that's because we believe in God and we believe that His righteousness and justice. But in the ancient Near East, they believed that the gods had this temperament. Exactly. Mm-hmm. So the Bible speaks in a way that ancient Israelites could understand, but it is not a copy of ancient documents. And this is seen in the contrast that it has with the ancient Near East, because a lot of people say, well, it's just a copy. Whoever wrote the Bible just copied it, to disprove the Bible. But you can see these huge contrasts that it makes to the ancient Near East, that to them it would have made absolutely no sense. Like nobody human in that time probably would have ever thought of writing anything like this. So a recap of days 4 through 6. So the luminaries are giving the task of distinguishing between day and night. So we see the functions that are given to the luminaries. The birds and fish are created on day 5. And on day 6, humans and animals are created and given their functions. So on day 4, God made
The heavens and earth. I'm going.
day 4.
Oh, day 4. Over there.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's more specific.
Yeah. And on day 5, God made. Mm-hmm. And on day 6, God made. Yeah. And then humans, exactly. And then humans are given the function to subdue and blank over
And
creation.
rule over creation.
Exactly. All right, and here are the answers. If anybody
Oh my God! Wow.
review during the week. All right. So did anybody volunteer to read this part?
Oh, me.
All right.
Okay. In heaven and earth and all their array were finished. Oh, finished. And on the 7th day, God finished His work that He had done, and He rested on the 7th day from all His work that He had done. And God blessed the 7th day, and He sanctified it, because on it He rested from all His work that there was to do. Genesis 2:1-3.
Mm-hmm. So this is a reason why we're here today, specifically today, keeping the Sabbath. And this portion is what is read in the Kiddush on Friday nights. So if any of you guys do like the traditional Jewish Kiddush, this is all read. There's also a song to it and everything. It's really nice. So it all starts with recounting creation and why we're actually doing the Sabbath to begin with. So on the 7th day, He rested. So the concept of
It's a teaching.
Yeah. So the concept of divine rest is prominent in the ancient Near Eastern literature. So deity's rest is achieved in a temple and generally as a result of order having been established. So a deity doesn't rest, his presence doesn't come into a temple until there's order established. So the rest, while it represents disengagement from the process of establishing order, so like he stops establishing order per se, whether through conflict with other deities or not, because in the ancient Near East they thought of deities like they would fight each other, and there was big conflicts between a bunch of gods. So it is more importantly an expression of engagement as the deity takes his place in the helm to maintain an ordered, secure, and stable chaos. So it's basically when the deity started ruling. So when the deity rested, he started ruling. We see a few examples of this too. So, some examples in the ancient Near East would be that rest can be disrupted by rebellion. Divine rest can be achieved after conflict. So after a conflict or like the fights, we're going to see some examples afterwards. And the ancient Near East is the divine rest is achieved after order, bringing acts of creation. So this is a very good example of Genesis 1. And the divine rest is achieved in the temple. I didn't really touch much on this because I'm not an expert in the temple, but the temple, the Genesis 1 is modeled after the creation of the temple. You see a lot of parallels to Exodus when the tabernacle specifically is built. So the Eden, it represents the temple, and the temple represents Eden. So the divine rest is achieved in part by creating people to work in the God's place and on their behalf. So this is the ancient Near Eastern mindset. And divine rest is characterized by ongoing control and stability. So when someone, this is a good example for us to understand that in our mindset, because a lot of this might not make a lot of sense because we're not ancient Near Eastern people. So when someone wins an election, they take up their rest in office. This is basically what taking up rest means. It doesn't mean that they go there and sleep. It means that they go take up their rest, meaning that they start ruling in office. So they don't go take a nap, they start ruling. So this was like a synonymous term for that. So the turmoil and the uncertainty of the election is over, like the chaos is over, and now they can settle down to the important business at hand. So it's the same thing we see in Genesis. All the turmoil and the chaos of bringing order and like all of that is over. So now God starts ruling. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So divine rest, this kind of like puts it together pretty nicely. It's engagement without obstacle rather than disengagement without responsibilities. All right? I hope that makes sense. So I had to read it a few times. I was like, okay.
Yeah, but this is going to be taking a lot to master all this stuff.
Oh, no.
We read Deuteronomy.
Exactly. And then there's a few verses that talk about rest also. So this one says, "Arise, O Lord, your resting place and your mighty ark." You and your mighty ark. And then this one is pretty interesting, Deuteronomy 12:10, where it says, "You will cross the Jordan and you will settle in the land which Adonai is your God is giving you as an inheritance, and he will give you rest from all your enemies from all around, and you will live securely." So what does it mean to be given rest from your enemies, that you can sleep? Not really. It means that the chaos is over. They're not going to cause any chaos, so you can rule over your land. Everything can function properly. And also in this one, Exodus 33:14, and he said, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." So it can mean like rest, like yes, you're relaxed because the enemies are not attacking you. That's also like rest. But we see like rest has a much larger connotation, different connotations in the ancient Near East, besides what we would see nowadays as just taking a nap. And then I don't want to read the entire thing. All right, so the rest here is a result of the fact that people have been created to work and that the gods were tired of doing. So in the ancient Near East, for the ancient Near East, they thought of rest as in like the gods don't need to do anything anymore because humans were made and now humans can feed them. Humans can do everything as long as they're not too noisy. So the containment or destruction of the chaotic cosmic forces that is often a central part of ancient creation narrative leads to rest, peace, or repose from the gods. So it's very interesting, this part here. So likewise, it is the gods' inability to find rest from the noise and the disturbance of humankind that leads to the flood. So in a lot of ancient Near Eastern literature, the gods sent a flood to just wipe out human beings because they were too noisy. Again, just showing the difference between the character of God and the character of the so-called gods in the ancient Near East. So God does not require rest from either the cosmic or human disturbances, but he seeks rest in a dwelling place where he can dwell with us. All right, so somebody can read this one. You can read this one.
Okay. Divine time into 7-day period was a practice that is so far unattested in the other cultures of the ancient Near East. Though there were particular days of the month in Mesopotamia that were considered unlucky, and they were often 7 days apart. That is the 7th day of the month, the 14th day of the month, etc. Israel's Sabbath was not celebrated on certain days of the month, and was not linked to the cycle of the moon or to any other cycle of nature. It was simply observed every 7th day.
So I found this.
That's the bread. That's the bread of life.
Mm-hmm. Or the challah bread. And then, so yes, this was pretty interesting. This is from the IVP. So they would divide days between 7, like they would say on the 7th day of the month and 14th day of the month. They were considered unlucky days. But something like the Shabbat is not attested to. We haven't found anything that is similar to it in the ancient Near East as of yet. So it's pretty interesting also. And now we're going to look at the phrase, "and it was good." So a lot of times when we look at it was good, we think of it as like in moral or ethical terms, like or as the quality of workmanship. So yeah, it was good, like it's a nice animal. Like when we see animals, they're so nice, they're so good. Like we think of it in good as like more emotional terms, I guess. But the Hebrew term could be used in those ways. It can. So it's not saying that the Hebrew can't be used like the word tov. It can be used as like morally good. But the context here indicates a different direction. So we can find out what the author meant when he was saying that this was good by looking for something not to be good. So when does the Bible ever talk about something not being good? And it's really close by in Genesis 2:18. So it says that it's not good for man to be alone. It's not only it's not talking about morally, it has nothing to do with a moral perfection or quality of workmanship, but it's more a comment about the function. So the human condition is not functionally complete without the woman. So if you have man and woman, there's no function. So, and it was good. It talks more about the functional readiness of the cosmos for human beings rather than like the moral goodness of it. So readers were assured that all functions were operating well and in accord with God's purpose and direction. So I think John Walton in his book, he says that it's kind of like God going like, check, okay, this is good, this is done, complete, good, complete. Kind of like a word of saying like complete or good, it's done. So, just to finish up, in Genesis 1:1, we started with chaos, the sea, and darkness. We started like this. And now we have this. That's pretty cool. And then try to keep these images in mind also when you study the Bible and when you look at the theme of chaos and order. This is chaos, this is order. But a lot of times you can take it as, I guess, a more spiritual way of being like, this is us without Torah, this is us with Torah, when God establishes order in our lives. So we can look disordered or we can look ordered. It all
I
depends.
wish I can go to a place like that.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. It's pretty nice. So in summary, Genesis 1 is about the world's functional origins, not its material origins. In the ancient Near East, to create something meant to give it a function. The ancient Near East, they saw existence as more functional than material. This is what they prioritized. Today, we prioritize kind of like the material stuff. Like if it physically exists, doesn't mean that either or isn't important. It's just what they saw as important. So that's why Genesis 1 focuses on functional origins, because that's what they thought of as important. They didn't really care about how the atoms came together. Like they didn't think in those terms. They wanted to see who gave it function, who brought it out of chaos. An overarching thing in Genesis 1 is chaos and order, and you can see all of the other themes also in Genesis 1. We focus on chaos and order specifically. And then tohu vavohu, the word that is described a lot of times as translated as formless and void, is more unproductive than formless. And then the first thing that God creates in Genesis 1 is time. Days 1 and 3 about establishing functions. And then days 4 and 6 about establishing the functionaries.
What the heck is going on over there?
So days 1 and 3 about establishing functions. Days 4 and 6 about establishing functionaries. So the functionaries that are going to carry out the functions. All right. So this is kind of like the blueprint, and then this is who are going to build it, basically, or who's going to carry the functions out. So days 1 and 3, this is what is going to happen. Days 4 and 6, who's going to make that happen? And then divine rest is not about taking a nap. It's about ruling. So
when you rest, I mean, the fight was over and now you're ruling.
Exactly. In the ancient Near Eastern mindset, when you said rest, especially about a god or a king, that's what they thought. Mm-hmm. And that's it. You guys have any questions?
Stop it too hard.